A billionaire laughs. A janitor stays silent. Everyone watches the humiliation. But seconds later, security doesn't grab the janitor. They grab the billionaire. And what happens next leaves the entire room frozen. The room was filled with power. Diamonds sparkled. Laughter echoed. Money moved in whispers. This wasn't just a gala. This was where the richest people in the city came to remind each other who mattered. And tonight, one man decided to humiliate someone he thought didn't. A quiet janitor. But what he didn't know was that silence can be very, very dangerous. Welcome to Prime Tale, where every story has a twist you won't see coming. If you love powerful, emotional stories that keep you hooked till the very end, subscribe to the channel for more story. Now let's begin. The grand ballroom shimmered like a dream built on money. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, scattering light across polished marble floors. Every table was dressed in gold-trimmed linen, every chair occupied by someone whose name carried weight. Politicians, CEOs, investors, influencers. And at the center of it all stood Victor Hale, a billionaire known not just for his wealth, but for his pride. Victor didn't walk into rooms, he owned them. His tailored black tuxedo fit like it had been designed for royalty. A glass of aged whiskey rested in his hand as he greeted guests, flashing a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Tonight," he said loudly to a circle of admirers, "we celebrate success." The crowd responded with polite laughter. But across the room, someone else was working, quietly, unnoticed. A janitor. He wore a simple uniform, dark blue, slightly worn. His movements were slow, deliberate. He cleaned with care, as if the floor beneath these powerful people mattered more than the people themselves. His name was Daniel, and he said nothing. He didn't look up when people passed him, didn't react when someone nearly bumped into him, didn't flinch when a waiter rushed past and spilled a drop of wine near his shoes. He simply cleaned, as if he didn't belong and didn't mind. But Victor noticed him. At first, it was just a glance, then a frown, then irritation. Because in a room built to impress, the presence of a janitor felt like a stain. Victor leaned toward one of his associates. "Who let maintenance in here during a high-profile event?" The associate shrugged. "Probably part of the hotel staff." Victor's jaw tightened slightly. This is not the place for that. He took a slow sip of his drink, watching Daniel from across the room. And then something shifted. Daniel walked closer. Not intentionally. Just doing his job. But to Victor, it felt like an intrusion. The billionaire stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the marble. Conversations softened as people sensed tension. Victor stopped just inches away from Daniel. "Hey." The word cut through the air. Daniel paused. Slowly, he looked up. His expression was calm, neutral, respectful. "Yes, sir?" Victor glanced around, making sure people were watching. And they were. "Do you realize where you are?" Daniel blinked once. "Yes, sir. I'm working." A few guests exchanged glances. Victor chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Working," he repeated. "You think this is the place for this?" He gestured dismissively at Daniel's uniform. The room grew quieter. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He lowered his gaze slightly. "I was assigned to clean this section, sir." Victor shook his head, smiling now, but it was sharp. No. This is a private event. Exclusive." He leaned in slightly. "People like you don't belong here." A few gasps rippled through the crowd. But no one stepped in, because this was Victor Hale. And no one challenged Victor Hale. Daniel stood still. No anger. No embarrassment. Just silence, which somehow made Victor even more irritated. "Oh, I get it," Victor continued, raising his voice slightly. "You think because you're quiet, no one notices you." A pause. "But trust me, we do." The tension was thick now. Eyes were locked on the scene. Phones subtly raised. This was becoming something. Victor took a step back, raising his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced mockingly, "let's give a round of applause to the hardest working man in the room." A few awkward claps followed. Most people stayed silent. Daniel didn't move, didn't react, didn't defend himself. And that made Victor smirk. Security. Victor called out sharply. Two guards at the far end of the room turned immediately. "Remove him," Victor said, gesturing lazily toward Daniel. "This isn't a place for cleaning staff during my event." The guards hesitated for half a second. Just half. Then they started walking. The room held its breath. Daniel finally spoke. Not loudly, not aggressively, just calmly. "Are you sure you want to do that?" Victor laughed. "Am I sure?" he repeated. "You're asking me that?" Daniel nodded once. "Yes, sir." Something about the way he said it didn't sound like a question. It sounded like a warning. But Victor didn't hear it. Or maybe he ignored it. "Get him out," Victor said firmly. The guards reached them. And for a moment, everything went still. Because instead of grabbing Daniel, they stopped, looked at him, then looked at Victor. Confusion flickered across Victor's face. "What are you waiting for?" he snapped. One of the guards spoke quietly. "Sir, we've received different instructions." Victor frowned. "What instructions?" The guard swallowed, and then said the words that changed everything. "From the owner." A pause. Victor's expression hardened. "I am the owner." The guard hesitated, then shook his head. "No, sir." He turned slightly toward Daniel. And in that moment, the entire room realized something was very, very wrong. The room didn't just go quiet. It froze. Every whisper, every clink of glass, every movement gone. All eyes shifted between Victor and the janitor. "Daniel." Victor let out a short laugh, shaking his head as if he'd just heard the most ridiculous joke of his life. "All right," he said, voice tight with disbelief. "That's enough." He stepped closer to the guard. "I don't know who gave you that instruction," Victor continued, lowering his voice slightly, "but you're clearly mistaken." The guard didn't respond immediately. His posture stiffened, respectful but firm. "With all due respect, sir, we are not mistaken." Victor's smile faded. Slowly, dangerously. "You're standing in my event," Victor said. "In my venue. Speaking to me like that." A murmur spread through the guests. Something was shifting. Power was being questioned, and people could feel it. The second guard spoke this time. The order came directly from the top. Victor's jaw clenched. "I am the top." Silence. Then, "No, sir." That word hit harder than anything else that night. No. Not maybe. Not we're unsure. Just no. Victor turned sharply toward Daniel, his patience cracking. "Who do you think you are?" he snapped. "Some kind of joke?" Daniel didn't move, didn't raise his voice, didn't even change his expression. "I'm just doing my job," he said quietly. And somehow that made it worse. Victor scoffed loudly, turning to the crowd. "You hear this," he said. "This is what happens when people forget their place." A few forced chuckles echoed. But most people weren't laughing anymore. They were watching Daniel. Because something about him didn't match the situation. There was no fear, no panic, no desperation, just control. Victor stepped forward again, now visibly irritated. "Let me make this simple," he said. "You're done here." He pointed toward the exit. "Walk out. Now. Before I make it worse for you." Daniel looked at him. Really looked at him this time. And for the first time that night, there was something different in his eyes. Not anger. Not fear. Recognition. "You already made it worse," Daniel said calmly. The words landed like a crack in glass. Victor blinked. "What does that mean?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket. Slowly. The guards tensed slightly. Guests leaned in. And Victor smirked. "Oh, what now?" he said mockingly. "You're going to show me your employee ID?" But Daniel pulled out something else. Not a badge. Not a cleaning cloth. A small, sleek card. Black. Minimal. Elegant. He held it between his fingers for a moment, then handed it to the guard. The guard took it carefully, looked down, and his expression changed instantly. His posture straightened even more. "Yes, sir," the guard said quietly. "Sir." The word echoed louder than anything Victor had said all night. Victor's smirk disappeared. "What is that?" he demanded. The guard didn't answer him. Instead, he handed the card to the second guard, who reacted the same way. Immediate respect. Immediate understanding. Victor stepped forward, snatching the card from the guard's hand. He looked at it, and for the first time that night, Victor Hale didn't have control over his expression, because printed on that card was a name, a title, and a logo he knew very, very well. His eyes widened just slightly, but enough. Enough for the people closest to him to notice. This isn't, Victor muttered. His voice dropped. Unsteady. He looked up at Daniel. No, he said, shaking his head. No, that's not possible. Daniel said nothing, which made it worse. Victor turned back to the card, reading it again, as if the words might change. But they didn't, because the truth was simple, brutal, and undeniable. Daniel wasn't just a janitor. He was the man who owned the company that owned the venue, the holding group, the silent investor, the name that never appeared in public, but controlled everything behind the scenes. Victor took a step back. Just one. But it felt like a collapse. You're. He couldn't even finish the sentence. Daniel gently took the card back, slipped it into his pocket, and spoke. Calm, measured, final. I prefer to observe before I speak, he said. You learn a lot that way. The room was completely silent now. No one dared interrupt. Victor's mind was racing. No, he said again, louder this time. If that were true, I would know. Daniel tilted his head slightly. Would you, he asked. That question cut deeper than any insult. Because Victor suddenly wasn't sure. He had built his empire on visibility, power, recognition. But this man had built his in silence. And now it was clear which one mattered more. Victor looked around, at the guests, at the guards, at the room he thought he owned. And for the first time that night, he realized something terrifying. Control had shifted. Completely. This is ridiculous, Victor said, trying to recover. Even if that's true, you can't just walk in here like this. I can, Daniel interrupted. Not loudly, but firmly. And that was enough to stop Victor mid-sentence. I built this structure so I could walk in anywhere, Daniel continued. As anyone. A pause. To see the truth. Victor's chest rose and fell faster now. This is some kind of setup, he said. A test. Daniel didn't answer. Because the answer was obvious. Yes. And Victor had failed. Badly. The air in the ballroom felt heavier. Like the walls themselves were listening, watching, judging. Victor stood frozen, the weight of realization pressing down on him from every direction. The whispers had started, soft at first, then spreading. Is it true? That's him. He owns the group. The same people who had laughed at Victor's jokes minutes ago were now looking at him differently, not with admiration, but with doubt. And doubt is the beginning of collapse. Victor straightened his posture, trying to regain control. No, he said firmly, more to himself than anyone else. This doesn't change anything. Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly. It changes everything, he replied. Victor ignored him, turning instead to the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, forcing confidence into his voice, there seems to be a misunderstanding. No one clapped. No one responded. That had never happened before. Victor's throat tightened slightly. This man, he pointed at Daniel, is clearly playing some kind of role. And enough. The word wasn't loud, but it carried authority. Real authority. The kind that doesn't need volume. Daniel stepped forward. For the first time, not as a janitor, but as something else entirely. You've said enough tonight, he continued. Victor's face hardened. You don't get to silence me in my own event. Daniel held his gaze. This isn't your event. That sentence hit like a final blow. Because now, everyone believed it. Victor laughed, but it sounded different now. Unstable. You think you can just walk in here and take over? Daniel didn't blink. I don't think, he said. I already did. The guards stepped closer. Not to Daniel, to Victor. Subtly, but unmistakably. Victor noticed. And for the first time that night, fear crept in. This is insane, Victor said. You're making a mistake. Daniel shook his head. No, he said quietly. You did. A long pause followed, the kind that stretches and suffocates. Then Daniel spoke again. Victor Hale, he said, his voice calm but sharp, you built your reputation on power. Victor didn't respond. You believed respect could be demanded, Daniel continued. That people were beneath you. Another pause. And tonight you proved it. Victor's hands clenched. This is a business, he snapped. Not a charity. Daniel nodded slightly. Exactly. He looked around the room. At the guests. At the staff. At the people who had witnessed everything. And in business, character matters. Victor scoffed. Character doesn't build empires. Daniel met his eyes. No, he said, but it decides who keeps them. That was it. That was the moment. The shift. The fall. Because everyone in that room understood what was coming next. Even before Daniel said it. Effective immediately, Daniel continued. All partnerships under your name are under review. Gasps. Real ones this time. Not polite. Not controlled. Victor's face drained of color. You can't do that, he said. I can, Daniel replied. And I will. Victor stepped forward, desperation creeping in. You're overstepping. Daniel didn't move. You underestimated the room, he said. Then he turned slightly to the guards. Escort Mr. Hale out. The words echoed, louder than anything that had been said all night. Victor froze, just like Daniel had earlier. Full circle. No, Victor said. You don't get to do this to me. The guards stepped closer. Firm. Professional. Unstoppable. Sir, one of them said quietly, please come with us. Victor looked around, hoping, searching, for support, for loyalty, for anything. But no one moved. No one spoke. Because power had already chosen its side. And it wasn't his. As the guards took hold of his arm, Victor realized something too late. The man he humiliated was the only one who could have saved him. And now, he wouldn't. Victor's shoes dragged slightly against the polished floor as the guards escorted him forward. Not long ago, that same floor had echoed with confidence under his steps. Now it echoed with something else. Humiliation. The doors of the grand ballroom stood ahead, tall, gold-trimmed, symbolic. An entrance for the powerful. An exit for the fallen. Wait, Victor said suddenly, pulling his arm slightly. The guards paused. Not releasing him, just allowing the moment. Victor turned. Slowly. His eyes locked onto Daniel. You planned this, he said, his voice no longer loud, but sharp, searching. This whole thing, you set me up. The room leaned in again, because this wasn't over. Not even close. Daniel stood exactly where he had been. Still, composed, watching. I didn't plan your behavior, Daniel replied calmly. Victor's jaw tightened. No, he said, shaking his head. You knew what would happen. Daniel took a few steps forward now. Measured. Controlled. Every movement pulling the room's attention with him. I created an opportunity, he said. You made the choice. That line landed hard. Because it wasn't just a defense. It was a mirror. Victor laughed bitterly. So this is what you do, he asked. Dress up like staff spy on people? Daniel's expression didn't change. I observe leadership, he said. A pause. Especially from those who claimed to have it. A ripple moved through the crowd. Because now this wasn't just about Victor. It was about everyone watching. Victor looked around, noticing the shift. People avoiding his eyes. People studying Daniel. People recalculating. You think this makes you better than me? Victor snapped. Daniel tilted his head slightly. No, he said. It reveals the difference. That silence again. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Victor exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. You have no idea what it takes to build what I built, he said. The pressure. The decisions. The sacrifices. I do, Daniel interrupted quietly. Victor stopped. Something in that tone was different. Not defensive. Not proud. Just certain. And for the first time, Victor hesitated. What do you mean? He asked. Daniel looked at him. Really looked at him. And then slowly, he began to speak. I started with nothing, he said. The room stilled. No one moved. I cleaned offices at night, Daniel continued. Not as a test. Not as an experiment. A pause. As survival. Victor's expression shifted, just slightly. Confusion mixed with something else. I watched people like you, Daniel said. Every night. Another step forward. The doors to the ballroom opened. Cool night air slipped inside, brushing against the tension that still clung to every corner of the room. Victor stood at the threshold, half in, half out, a man caught between two worlds. Behind him, power, status, reputation. In front of him, uncertainty, and possibly nothing. "Move," one of the guards said quietly. Not aggressive, just final. Victor didn't move immediately. Instead, he turned again. One last time. "Tell me something," he said, his voice steady now, but different. "If I had said nothing, if I had ignored him." He gestured slightly toward where Daniel stood. Would any of this have happened? The question hung in the air. Because it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about choice. Daniel answered without hesitation. No. Simple. Direct. Unavoidable. Victor let out a small breath. Almost a laugh. "Unbelievable," he murmured. He shook his head slowly. All of this because of one moment. Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "Every collapse starts with one moment," he said. Victor looked down briefly, processing, replaying, realizing, and then he nodded. Not in agreement, not in defeat, but in understanding. "Then I guess," Victor said quietly, "this is mine." The guards guided him forward, and, this time, he didn't resist. As he stepped outside, the doors closed behind him with a soft, but final, sound. Inside the ballroom, no one spoke for several seconds, because they all felt it. A shift, not just in power, but in perspective. Daniel turned slightly, addressing the room, not loudly, but with quiet authority. "The event will continue," he said. No dramatic speech, no celebration, just control. And that was enough. Slowly, conversations resumed. But they were different now. Lower, more careful, because everyone understood something they hadn't before. Power isn't always the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes, it's the quietest one. Across the room, a woman whispered to her companion, "Did you know?" He shook his head. "No," he replied, "but I wish I had." Another guest spoke softly. "That could have been any of us." And that was the truth. Daniel didn't just expose Victor. He exposed a mindset, one that lived quietly in many of the people standing in that very room. And now, they couldn't ignore it. Daniel walked toward the center of the ballroom. Not rushed, not dramatic, just present. A staff member approached him carefully. "Sir, would you like us to make an announcement?" Daniel shook his head. "No," he said. "There's nothing to announce." Because everything had already been seen, felt, understood. He glanced once toward the doors where Victor had exited. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with something far more complex. Awareness. Because this wasn't just the end of something. It was the beginning. The night air felt colder than Victor expected. Or maybe it was just him. He stood on the steps outside the venue, the distant sound of the city humming around him. Cars passed. Lights flickered. Life continued, as if nothing had just happened. But for Victor, everything had changed. He adjusted his jacket slightly, trying to regain some sense of control, some dignity. But his hands weren't as steady as before. Behind him, the doors remained closed, sealed, like the world he once belonged to had already moved on. Victor exhaled slowly, then reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. Dozens of notifications, messages, missed calls. But none of them mattered. Not yet. Because there was only one thing on his mind. "Daniel, who are you?" he muttered under his breath. But deep down, he already knew. Not just who Daniel was, but what he represented. Everything Victor had ignored. Everything he had dismissed. Everything he thought didn't matter. A black car pulled up to the curb. One of his drivers. Right on time. As always. The driver stepped out quickly, opening the door. "Sir," he said respectfully. Victor looked at him. Really looked at him. For the first time in a long time. Not as an employee. Not as a function. But as a person. And something about that realization sat heavy in his chest. "Did you see?" Victor asked. The driver hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Yes, sir." No judgment. No commentary. Just truth. Just truth. Victor let out a slow breath. "Of course you did," he said quietly. He stepped toward the car, then paused, looking back at the building one last time. That place had represented everything: power, control, identity, and in one night, it had taken it all away. Or maybe it had just revealed what was never really his to begin with. Victor slid into the back seat. The door closed softly, and as the car pulled away, he didn't look at his phone, didn't make a call, didn't give an order. He just sat there, in silence, for the first time in years, with nothing to say. The city lights stretched endlessly outside the tinted window. But Victor wasn't looking at them. He was staring at his reflection. Faint, distorted, unsteady. For years, that reflection had meant something. Power, control, identity. Now, it looked like a stranger. The car moved smoothly through the quiet streets, but inside, Victor's thoughts were anything but calm. Every second of the night replayed in his head. Daniel's silence, the crowd's reaction, the moment the guards didn't move. The word no. It echoed louder now than it did in the ballroom. Victor leaned back slowly, closing his eyes for just a moment. But the silence didn't bring peace. It brought clarity, and clarity can be brutal. "Sir, where to?" the driver asked gently. Victor opened his eyes. For a second, he didn't answer. Because, for the first time in years, he didn't have a destination. His life had always been scheduled, planned, controlled, every move calculated. But now, there was no plan, no meeting, no next step, just space. "Drive," Victor said quietly. The driver nodded. "Yes, sir." The car continued forward. No direction, just movement. And somehow, that felt fitting. Minutes passed. Or maybe longer. Time didn't feel the same anymore. Victor finally reached for his phone again. This time, he looked. Messages flooded the screen. "Call me ASAP. We need to talk. What happened tonight? Is it true?" And then, the ones that mattered. "We're pulling out. This changes things. We can't be associated with this." Victor's jaw tightened. Not in anger. In realization. This wasn't just embarrassment. This was impact. Real consequences. The kind that don't disappear with a statement or a press release. Because what happened tonight was seen. And, in his world, perception was reality. Victor locked his phone slowly. His grip tightened slightly, then loosened. Because anger wouldn't fix this. Control wouldn't fix this. Nothing he used before would work now. And that was the hardest part to accept. "Pull over," Victor said suddenly. The driver glanced in the mirror. "Sir, just pull over." The car slowed, then stopped along a quiet street. No noise. No crowd. Just stillness. Victor stepped out. The night air hit him again, but this time it felt different. Sharper. Clearer. Real. He took a few steps forward, looking around. A small roadside cafe sat across the street. Nothing special. Simple. Quiet. But something about it pulled him. Without thinking too much, Victor crossed the street. The door opened with a soft chime. Inside, a few people sat scattered around. No one recognized him. No one stood up. No one cared. And strangely, that felt honest. Victor walked to the counter. A young woman looked up. "Good evening," she said politely. "What would you like?" Victor paused. Not because he didn't know what to order, but because no one had asked him that question without expectation in years. No pressure. No performance. Just a question. "Coffee," he said. She nodded. "Sure." No hesitation. No special treatment. Just normal. Victor paid. Waited. And as he stood there, something unusual happened. He noticed things. The way she moved. Focused. Tired but composed. The way she handled each order with care. The way people spoke to her. Some kind. Some not. And suddenly, the memory hit him. Hard. Daniel. Standing there. Silent. Working. And Victor. Tearing him down. For what? For existing? For not fitting into his version of importance? Victor swallowed. The realization wasn't loud. It didn't explode. It settled. Heavy. Permanent. "Here you go," the woman said, handing him the coffee. Victor took it. "Thank you," he said. And he meant it. Not out of habit, not out of image, but because he finally understood the value of it. He sat down by the window, watching the street, holding the cup, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about power, or money, or control. He was thinking about one question: who have I been all this time? And for once, he didn't like the answer. Morning came quietly. No headlines yet. No public statements. No official fallout. Just light. Victor hadn't slept. The coffee shop had closed hours ago, but he remained in his car afterward, thinking, processing, breaking, and rebuilding slowly. By sunrise, one thing was clear. He had two choices: protect his image, or face the truth. And for the first time in his life, he chose differently. Later that day, the business world began to move. Calls were scheduled. Emergency meetings arranged. Damage control teams activated. But Victor did something unexpected. He canceled them. All of them. Instead, he made one call. Not to a partner, not to a lawyer, but to the venue. "I need to speak with Daniel," he said. There was a pause on the other end. "I'll check if he's available, sir." Victor waited.